Hey guys, Reese here. Thanks for coming back to my channel. I'm here today with my fresh brewed cup of cappuccino to talk one of my favorite topics, which is money and how to save more of your hard-earned cash. We're definitely living in a weird time right now with all this virus mess going on, the economy taking a tumble, unemployment rates skyrocketing right now. I was doing a little research because one of my tenants called me and said that, next month they might have a little bit of issue paying rent, understandably due to everyone filing for unemployment. And I was left wondering, how many people, given the average savings rate, the average American savings, how long can the average American hold out while unemployed? And it's relatively well known that the average American doesn't have too much money set aside in savings, unfortunately. But I started doing some Google searches this past weekend, and the stats are substantially worse than I thought. It turns out that according to a survey done by Go Banking Rates in 2019, that 69% of Americans have less than $1,000 set aside in savings for an emergency. And in addition to the average American only having $1,000 set aside in savings, 78% of working adults live paycheck to paycheck. So if they were to be laid off or have an emergency, they would have to go into debt to cover that emergency. And with 78% of Americans living paycheck to paycheck, it's just painfully obvious that Americans aren't saving enough money, with the average savings rate around 7.8% of after-tax income. And while we can't point to the lack of wage growth and other external economic factors as excuses as to why the American savings rate is so low, I do believe most Americans have room for improvement given a solid budget, a little self-discipline, and some financial education. So guys, if you want to be able to check off financial education on that list, go ahead and give me a subscribe and like this video. That way you can see all my upcoming content on real estate, financial education, budgeting, credit, everything like that. And so with that said, guys, I wanted to make this video today to show you how it's very possible with some hard work to save about half of your income, and over the next coming years, turn that into a six-figure net worth like I have. And so step one here is obviously going to be setting a budget, but in addition to setting a budget, tracking it weekly. By setting a budget and tracking it weekly, you're now accountable for every dollar that you spend, especially the ones that you never realized you spent in the first place. I like to use a website called mint.com, and the very cool thing about mint.com is that you can connect your bank accounts, your credit cards, debit cards, and it'll automatically track that spending for you so nothing slips through the cracks. And so with mint.com, I will go ahead and set up my budget per certain category, and then as I spend money in that category with my credit card, Mint will automatically track it and add it to that category. So if I go to the grocery store and spend $100, it'll be tracked usually within the same day under, say, food and beverage or something like that. Those sorts of things are no longer slipping through the cracks because they're automatically tracked in Mint. And now it's also very important that you go ahead and check that website, mint.com, weekly, so that you don't just put it out of sight, out of mind, but it's refreshed on a weekly basis. Maybe set up a day, say Sunday at 2 p.m., where you sit down, go over your finances, see what you spent the last week, and then reassess for the future week to stay on budget for the month. Now, unfortunately, one mistake I see many people make, including some financial gurus on YouTube, is that when they're budgeting, they focus on the smaller kind of non-essential items, the variable spending. So they focus on your entertainment budget, your $5 a day coffee budget, items like that that are very variable throughout the month. And while this seems like a good idea because they are able to be changed quickly, you can immediately stop buying your $5 coffee and cut that out. There are two flaws with this type of thinking, this type of budgeting. The first flaw I see with this type of budgeting is that non-essential spending is, like I said, variable. It changes throughout the day, throughout the week, and the tough thing with this is it requires constant oversight. So every single day when you wake up to go to work and you want to stop by Starbucks and get that $5 coffee, you need to make the conscious decision that you're not going to buy that coffee today to save that money. And that means every single day you need to make that decision to stay on top of your budget. And that in turn means there's more opportunities for you to mess up, for you to say, you know what, today I'm gonna buy that $5 coffee because I deserve it. The second issue I see with this variable spending and trying to limit it when budgeting is that it tends to be a small dollar amount with a big effect on your lifestyle. So for example, going back to our Starbucks coffee example, if you were to cut out your $5 coffee every workday, so 20 days a month, that would be a savings of $100. But you have to also consider the effect that has on your lifestyle. So if you're somebody like myself who loves coffee and specifically loves Starbucks coffee, then that's gonna have a larger effect on your happiness for only $100 saving a month. And so for me, instead of focusing on your smaller variable spending, when I put my budget in order, I like to organize my most expensive expenses, let's say, down to my lowest expenses. So once I've organized my budget from most expensive to least expensive, I like to focus on reducing my top 3 to 5 expenses and then focus on just managing my cheaper expenses throughout the month. So for example, most people will have rent near the top of their expenses, their monthly expenses. And with rent, most people can reduce that expense by usually $100 to $200 without really lowering their quality of life. And the nice thing about rent is that it's now locked in for a year. So sure, you have to wait until your lease ends, which might be, 6 months to a year. But once you downgrade your living by $100 to $200, then it's locked in for a year and you no longer need to make that decision. It's done. You've saved $200 a month. And so for an example, I live in Columbus, Ohio, and we have one neighborhood that's called German Village that is the premier neighborhood in Columbus. It's located just south of downtown Columbus, beautiful brick roads, brick buildings, a lot of culture in that neighborhood. And then you go 5 minutes south of German Village and you have another neighborhood called Marion Village. And those roads are also brick. A lot of the houses are brick. It's a little lower quality, but not terribly different. However, when we look at the price difference between German and Marion Village, for a 2-bedroom in German Village, you're going to be paying around $1,650 a month. Whereas if you were to move just 5 minutes south, a 2-bedroom in Marion Village would be around $1,250 a month, for not much of a downgrade in quality of life. That's $400 saved that's locked in monthly. It's locked in for a year-long lease. And so now you've saved $400 a month and you don't have to think about it ever again. You don't have to think about it until your lease ends a year from now, and then you need to make one decision a year to keep your living standards lower and save that money. Versus variable spending, you need to make that decision every single day or once a month that you're gonna save that money to keep your budget low. And so while it's a big decision to commit to downgrading your living situation and moving, picking up and moving your family to a new location, it locks in such a large savings where in this particular example, that's $4,800 a year that you're now putting into savings that could potentially be used to invest in the stock market or my favorite, invest in the real estate market and turn that money over time into double or triple. So with just 1 year of savings on rent, you've turned that $5,000 into a future value of $10,000 to $15,000. Whereas if you were to save that $100 a month on coffee, that doesn't add up to much. Over time, sure, you'd save money, but that's a much harder decision to make and one that needs to be made every single day. And now those of you thinking, well, I own my home, I don't rent my home. There's ways you can reduce your payment on that. So for example, you have your PITI, your principal, interest, taxes, and insurance as some of your major costs when owning a home. Well, principal and interest, in times like these, you might be able to refinance your loan and lower your interest. The other thing I see often is that homeowners insurance. Most people will get homeowners insurance when they buy their home and then just have it auto renew for decades. And what they don't know is if they were to shop that rate annually, they'd save 10-15% on that insurance cost. And that's another way where if you haven't shopped that rate for 10 years, you might be able to save $50 to $100. Another thing you could do when owning a home is house hack. Now, I know house hacking won't work for everybody, whereas if you have a family with small children, you might not want a stranger living in your house. But if you own a home and you're a new married couple, it might be worth your time, your inconvenience to rent out an extra bedroom and make an extra $500 a month. Or you could rent out one garage bay of a two-car garage bay, or throw a shed in the backyard and rent out the shed. Just anything to get a little extra income from that property to lower your overall cost of home ownership. Now, one other example of a top 3 most expensive items in your budget would be food. And food has been something that I struggle with substantially. I love eating out. I love, the convenience of not having to prepare lunch when I go into the office. And I tend to eat Chipotle that's right across the street from my office every single day. But that adds up. That $7 Chipotle bowl adds up to, 7 times 20, $140 extra that I could have saved by cooking at home or cooking bulk from home and getting those meal costs down to say $2 a meal, which is not unheard of. By doing something called meal prepping or preparing your meals in bulk, you can eliminate the hassle of having to cook and pack every single day by cooking, say, once a week. Throw some food in a crock pot and you cook bulk once a week on Sunday, and that covers your lunches for the entire week. And by cooking in bulk, that also tends to lower the cost per meal substantially. Now, food, unfortunately, is one of those items that is variable, but also your top cost for most people. You're one of your top 3 costs for most people. So unfortunately, not as easy as lowering your home ownership or your rent cost. Food is one of those items that's worth focusing on, because with relative ease, once a week you need to decide to cook a meal, you can lower your food budget by, say, $100, depending on how many people you have in your family. By not spending that $100, that's $100 saved a month that will add up over time and turn into more money available for investing in the stock market or, once again, investing in real estate. And finally, my last example that might be part of your top 3 to 5 most expensive costs throughout the month is your car ownership and the car insurance that goes along with that vehicle. Now, unfortunately, in most cases, the newer the car you have, the more expensive your car insurance is as well. And so there's a secondary consequence to buying that new $30,000 sports car over just keeping your 10-year-old Honda Civic that has a value of $8,000. And so what I would recommend on transportation and on your vehicle is to live below your means when it comes to transportation. So maybe you can afford the $30,000 sports car, but by downgrading to a 5 to 10-year-old car that's still safe, you lower your cost both on your payment if you take out a loan on the car, as well as you lower your insurance that goes along with that vehicle. And of course, what you're willing to cut back on when it comes to your top 3 to 5 expenses is going to vary for everybody. For me, cutting back on my vehicle does not have that much of a reduction on my happiness, whereas somebody else who just loves cars, by not owning that $30,000 sports car, they're going to be substantially disappointed on a daily basis. And so not everybody is going to want to cut back in the same areas, but that's okay. By picking your top 3 to 5, cut back 2 to 4 of those and leave one of those items slightly higher because it brings a substantial amount of enjoyment to you. And that's the main thing we want to focus on, is how can we reduce our expenses? How can we lower our budget without substantially lowering our quality of life, our happiness, things like that? Because long term, if you're not happy with this budget, it's going to be next to impossible to keep on track with that budget and long term save money. And now once we've gotten control of those top 3 to 5 expenses, now we can focus a little bit of energy onto those smaller variable expenses and focus more on just monitoring those and not necessarily cutting them back to an extreme level. And what I mean by monitoring those smaller expenses is, for example, if you've set a $200 a month entertainment budget and you're monitoring your budget on, say, a weekly basis, you know that means you can roughly spend $50 a week on entertainment. So when it comes to monitoring and why we're checking into our budget on a weekly basis, is that if you spend $100 one week on entertainment, you know that now you only have $100 left for the rest of the month, the remaining 3 weeks. And so instead of having the ability to spend $50 a week thereon after, you now only have the ability to spend $30-something. And so that's what I mean by monitor. You know, if you go over $50 on your entertainment budget one month, that's not going to have that big of an effect on your budget. Whereas if you're paying $400 higher in rent because you want to live in, my example, German Village versus Marion Village, that is a huge monthly effect on your budget. One other point I'd like to make on the entertainment budget, for example, is that if you were to try and cut $100 off that entertainment budget, that once again is only really $100, but you've substantially reduced your standard of living. Now, when your friends ask you, would you like to go out to the bar? You've hit your $100 by the first 2 weeks. You technically, according to your budget, can't go out, and so that will reduce your happiness because now you might not be hanging out with friends as often, or you can't go watch that movie in theaters that you really wanted to go see. Whereas once again, going back to your rent example, by reducing your rent $400, that hasn't changed your style of living. Maybe you're not in as modern as a house. Maybe you have to drive 3 to 5 minutes farther to work, but there's no real effect on your overall happiness. And that's why I say monitor these budgets instead of really cut back, because you can monitor your entertainment budget and just catch yourself with little slip-ups. So you go over $25, $50, oh well, let's try and make that back next month. But there's no real reason to beat yourself up with that, because we all want to live our life. We all want to have fun. There's no reason to cut your budget back to a point where now it's substantially degraded our quality of life. And now that we've established our budget through larger cost cutting in the top 3 to 5 expenses and monitoring our lesser variable expenses, it's now time to go on to step 2, which is to set up a separate high yield savings account. I personally like Ally Bank or VO Bank. They both have great savings rates. And the reason we want to do this is we want a separate account where our savings will go separate from your, let's say, operating account, which is where you spend your money out of. So now what we want to do is calculate how much money do we have left over after spending our budget. So say you have an income of $5,000 a month after taxes, and your budget is, say, $3,000 a month. Well, you have a $2,000 gap in after-tax income and expenses. What you want to do is you want to go to your employer and set up direct deposit where that $2,000 is directly taken out of your paycheck and put into that new high-yielding savings account. That way, every single month, you don't have the option to spend over your budget. That money is separate, it's in another account. You've already paid yourself first, which is a common theme in entrepreneurship and wealth building, is pay yourself that savings first in a separate account, and then the only money you have left is the money you've budgeted and should be able to adhere to. And so now what this does is it automates your savings, and it makes it more of a pain in the butt to overspend. And so what we've done by setting up this separate savings account is we've eliminated decisions. Our savings are going automatically over to the new account, and our budget has been set in place and enforced because the only money we have coming into that main operating account is enough to cover our budget. And now budgeting is relatively difficult to maintain long term, especially if we're making decisions on a daily basis on, ooh, do I want that coffee? Ooh, do I want these other variable expenses? Whereas now we've eliminated decisions. The less decisions we have to make on a daily or weekly basis, the better chance we have of maintaining that budget for the long term. However, maintaining a budget only really goes so far. So we've automated our savings, we've set up our budget, we've reduced it as low as possible, but at a certain point, you can only save so much money. If you only make $2,000 a month after tax, and you can only realistically lower your budget to $1,500 a month, that's only $500 saved a month. And while that's better than nothing, that's not negative, at a certain point, if your goals are wealth building and financial freedom, you need to increase your income so that you can save more money. And so that's step 3 of this process of saving 50% of your income, is at a certain point, you need to learn how to increase your income. Now, the first way that most of us can increase our income are by negotiating our salary. Most of us are either paid hourly or have an annual salary. And so by negotiating that rate on an annual basis, that's the easiest way for us to try and get a little extra bump on our income. And now, while most of us, we get annual raises to begin with, those raises usually range from a percentage base where maybe, if you were an average employee, you get a 2% raise. If you were above average, you get a 3%. And if you were exceptional, you get a 4% raise. So when you go to negotiate your salary, one very important thing is to provide hard evidence as to why you deserve that top range salary bump. And so what you want to do is be thinking about this year-end raise throughout the year. And so keep track of those little things that you do that add extra value to the company and increase, and in turn increase your worth. So for example, those leadership courses that you take outside of work hours, or those additional accreditation classes you take for programming, for example, keep track of all these and then bring these in a written up format to your annual review, and then request to get the top end salary due to your extra effort put in outside of work hours. Now, realistically, you can really only ask for a raise every so often. Once a year, maybe if you're really looking to push hard, once every 6 months. But at a certain point, you're not going to be able to get any additional income out of your main job. And so now at this point, I hate the word, but it's really time for a side hustle or a side income, second job, some form of additional income outside of your main source. Now, hopefully when we did our initial budgeting and comparing that budget to your income, hopefully you're not negative or your income does not cover your expenses. And so ideally, this second form of income isn't required, but instead it's desired to increase your savings rate and push you closer to your financial goals or whatever you're saving that money for at a faster pace. And so in an ideal world, because this second form of income isn't needed but desired, we really want to aim for not an hourly or paid by time form of income like your job where you're paid by the amount of hours you put in, but we want to aim for more of a paid by results form of income for that second source of income. And the reason why we prefer paid versus results over paid versus time is we only have so much time in the week. If you're already working a 40-hour per week day job, you're not going to have much additional time outside of work hours to pursue creating income on the side. And so if we're working purely based on time, you're severely limited on how much money you can make through your side hustle. Whereas if we're being paid by results, you can scale that to realistically an unlimited amount of money. And so a very basic example of getting paid for results instead of time would be starting this lawn care business, and then you pay, say, a high school kid or a college student, you pay them $20 per yard, and then you charge the customer $30 per yard. And so you have that $10 profit margin between your expenses and your income, your revenue. And now this ignores the gas and the maintenance on the lawnmowers and things like that, but let's keep it simple. And so now for every lawn that you mow or have a employee mow, you make $10. And now there's no limit on how many yards you can mow. You know, the more yards you have in your schedule, the more employees you have doing the lawn mowing. And so the only drain on your time here is generating those new sales. And with, say, 10 hours per week, that might only be enough to mow, say, 10 to 20 lawns, small lawns. But with that 10 hours a week being used to generate sales, you might be able to generate 10 new clients a week with that time. And then those clients get their grass mowed once a week, once every 2 weeks for that $10 profit margin. So now by adding those new clients, you're now making an additional $100 a week, $100 every 2 weeks, and that should just scale from there. And so what I want to encourage you guys to do is think about what you enjoy, what you have passion for, a topic you have knowledge on, and then figure out a way to create a scalable business that you're paid for based on your results, not your hours put into that business. Obviously, lawn mowing is a simple example, and it's a great idea for kids or even yourself if you want to start a lawn care business yourself. However, I encourage you to focus on things you're actually passionate about. This example I gave is very simple, and obviously there are hiccups to every business you start, and so there will be difficulties along the way. And so by finding something you're passionate in, that'll help you overcome the difficulties that will inevitably arise throughout structuring this business and scaling it. Well guys, that's all I have for you in this video. I really appreciate you all sticking around. I hope this provided some valuable information on how to increase your savings rate and set you on that path towards that six-figure net worth, or building the foundation for whatever your financial goal is, whether that be just saving more than you spend, or saving towards six figures, $1 million, or $1 million and beyond. So once again, thank you very much, guys. If you would, please give a like on this video. Helps me out tremendously, especially for a small channel like mine, ranking in the YouTube algorithm and getting new people viewing my channel, so I can hopefully help them throughout their financial journey. And in addition to liking this video, please, if you're not subscribed already, go ahead, subscribe, and click that notification bell so that you get alerted for every new video I put out, so that we can stay in touch while I work towards my goals and while you achieve your financial goals. So thanks again, guys, and have a great day.